Picture this. It's November 4th, 1791, and the United States, barely a teenager as a nation, faces a nightmare it never saw coming. In a single, brutal morning, over 900 American soldiers, nearly a quarter of the entire U.S. military, are wiped out by a Native American force half their size. This wasn't just a loss. It was a catastrophe that shook the young nation to its core. Welcome to the Wabash Clash, also known as St. Clair's defeat, the most humiliating military disaster in American history. Today, we're diving deep into the chaos, the mistakes, and the lessons that reshaped a nation. So, grab a seat, history buffs. Let's march into the wilderness and unpack this forgotten tragedy. Hey history fans, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're cracking open a dark, dusty chapter of American history that doesn't get nearly enough attention. The Battle of the Wabash, or St. Clair's defeat, fought on November 4th, 1791. This isn't your typical Revolutionary War tale of plucky patriots or founding fathers signing papers. This is a raw, bloody story of a young America stumbling hard on the Ohio frontier. A defeat so devastating it nearly broke the nation's spirit. We're talking about a ragtag American army, a brilliant native alliance, and a disaster that forced the U.S. to rethink its entire military approach. From the snowy banks of the Wabash River to the halls of Philadelphia, this clash sent shockwaves that echoed for years. So, buckle up. We're heading into the wild frontier to uncover what went wrong, why it mattered, and how it changed America forever. Ready? Let's dive in. To understand the Wabash Clash, we need to set the stage. It's 1791, and the United States is a scrappy, ambitious startup of a nation, just 15 years out from the Declaration of Independence. The ink is barely dry on the Constitution, and the young republic is dreaming big, specifically about manifest destiny, the idea that America is destined to stretch from sea to shining sea. At the heart of this vision lies the Northwest Territory, a massive chunk of land west of the Appalachians, ceded by Britain after the Revolution. Think modern Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, a fertile wilderness ripe for settlement. But here's the catch. This land isn't empty. It's home to powerful Native American tribes, the Miami, Shawnee, Delaware, Wyandot, and others, who've lived here for centuries. These aren't scattered bands. They're sophisticated societies with deep ties to the land, and they're fed up with American settlers encroaching on their territory. Decades of broken treaties, violent raids, and shady land deals have fueled tensions to a boiling point. Enter the Western Confederacy, a rare and formidable alliance of tribes united under two brilliant leaders, Little Turtle, a Miami chief whose tactical genius rivaled any European general, and Blue Jacket, a Shawnee warrior with a knack for rallying fighters and striking fear into settlers. Together, they're a force to be reckoned with, commanding a coalition of 1,000 warriors battle-hardened by years of frontier skirmishes. And they've got a silent partner, the British. Still stinging from their loss in the Revolution, the British hold forts in Canada, places like Detroit and Niagara, and they're quietly funneling muskets, gunpowder, and supplies to the Confederacy. Why? To keep America weak and hemmed in east of the Appalachians, blocking their westward expansion. In Philadelphia, the young nation's capital, President George Washington is losing patience. Settlers are dying, frontier outposts are under attack, and the U.S. needs to assert control over the Northwest Territory to prove it's a real player on the world stage. Washington turns to General Arthur Street Clair, a 57-year-old Revolutionary War veteran and the governor of the Northwest Territory. His mission, raise an army, march 150 miles north from Fort Washington, modern Cincinnati, to the Miami capital of Kekianga, and crush the Western Confederacy. The prize is huge. Secure the frontier, open the door for settlers, and cement America's claim to the West. The risk? If St. Clair fails, the U.S. could lose credibility, embolden the tribes, and invite British interference. St. Clair's force starts at 2,000 men, a mix of 600 regular U.S. Army soldiers, short-term levies signed up for 6 months, and militia from Pennsylvania and Kentucky. On paper, it's a solid army. In reality, it's a powder keg of problems. Underfed, undertrained, and teetering on collapse. Let's see how it all unraveled. So, how did America's grand plan spiral into disaster? Let's follow St. Clair's march step by step. It's July 1791, and St. Clair sets out from Fort Washington with 2,000 men and big ambitions. His target is Kekianga, the Miami capital, about 150 miles north. This isn't a quick raid. He's tasked with building a string of forts to secure supply lines and establish a permanent U.S. presence. Sounds good, right? Except everything goes wrong from the start. First, the logistics are a nightmare. The U.S. Army is tiny, barely 2,500 men men total, and St. Clair's force is a hodgepodge. He's got 600 regulars, but the rest are levies and militia, many of whom have never fired a musket in battle. Supplies are even worse. Corrupt contractors deliver barrels of moldy flour, rancid meat, and wormy biscuits. Soldiers are starving, some reduced to eating horseflesh or boiling their boots. By October, desertions are rampant. St. Clair's down to 1,400 men, and morale is in the gutter. The march itself is grueling. The Ohio frontier is a tangle of dense forests, swamps, and rivers, and St. Clair's army crawls at 5 miles a day, hacking through underbrush and building forts like Hamilton and Jefferson to protect their supply chain. Every fort takes time, resources, and energy, stretching the campaign into late fall. Snow and sleet start falling, and the men are shivering in tattered uniforms, their boots disintegrating. St. Clair himself is no spring chicken. At 57, he's a Revolutionary War hero who fought at Trenton and Yorktown, but he's hobbled by gout, barely able to ride a horse or walk without pain. His leadership style doesn't help. He's stubborn, aloof, and clashes with his officers, especially Major General Richard Butler, his second in command. The two bicker constantly, creating a toxic chain of command that leaves junior officers confused and resentful. Meanwhile, Little Turtle and Blue Jacket are watching. Their scouts, moving like ghosts through the forest, track St. Clair's every step, counting campfires and noting weaknesses. The Western Confederacy isn't just a loose coalition. They're disciplined, strategic, and intimately familiar with the terrain. Little Turtle, in particular, is a master of guerrilla warfare, blending traditional tactics with European-style musket volleys learned from British allies. By November 3rd, 1791, St. Clair's army limps into a camp on a low bluff near the headwaters of the Wabash River in what's now Fort Recovery, Ohio. It's a miserable, snowy night, and the men are exhausted, hungry, and sick. St. Clair makes a fatal mistake. He underestimates his enemy. Fresh off a smaller native victory at Harmar's defeat in 1790, he assumes the tribes won't dare attack a force of his size head-on. His camp is sloppy, no trenches, weak picket lines, and his artillery is split across the river, poorly positioned. Worse, he sends 300 militia to camp separately, creating a vulnerable outpost. Little Turtle, however, sees an opportunity. His 1,000 warriors, Miami, Shawnee, Delaware, and others, are rested, well-armed, and ready to exploit St. Clair's arrogance. As the Americans sleep in their tents, the Confederacy prepares to strike. Then it happens. November 4th, 1791, 6:30 a.m. The forest comes alive with terror. Little Turtle's 1,000 warriors strike at dawn, their attack as precise as it is ferocious. They hit the militia camp across the river first, unleashing a storm of musket fire and war cries. The militia, poorly trained and caught off guard, break instantly, fleeing back to the main camp in a chaotic stampede that drags panic into the heart of St. Clair's force. The Confederacy's tactics are devastating. Warriors fan out in a crescent formation, using trees for cover, firing disciplined volleys, then darting forward with tomahawks and knives. They target officers first, sowing confusion, and pin the Americans in a deadly crossfire. St. Clair's artillery, split and poorly placed, is overrun before it can fire effectively. The regulars try to form lines, but the militia's collapse disrupts their ranks, and the camp becomes a slaughterhouse. For 3 agonizing hours, the battle rages. Snow turns red with blood. American soldiers, many barefoot and half-starved, can't reload fast enough to match the warriors' speed. St. Clair, despite his gout, rides through the chaos, rallying his men, but it's no use. Bullets tear through his coat, and his horse is shot out from under him. His officers fall one by one, including Butler, killed in the melee. By 9:30 a.m., it's over. St. Clair orders a desperate bayonet charge to break through the encirclement, allowing about 500 survivors to limp 30 miles south to Fort Jefferson. The wounded, left behind, face a grim fate, scalped or burned by vengeful warriors. The toll is staggering: 918 Americans dead or wounded, including 632 killed and 286 injured, over 60% of the force. The Confederacy loses maybe 40 men, a lopsided victory that exposes America's military as a paper tiger. This wasn't a battle, it was a massacre, and the young nation's pride lies in tatters on the snowy banks of the Wabash. The aftermath of the Wabash clash hits like a thunderbolt. When news reaches Philadelphia in late November 1791, the young capital is stunned. This is the worst defeat in U.S. history, proportionally worse than Pearl Harbor or any modern disaster. Of the 1,400 men St. Clair had left, nearly two-thirds are gone in a single morning. The loss isn't just lives, it's America's confidence, its frontier ambitions, and its reputation as a rising power. Congress, for the first time in U.S. history, launches an official investigation, hauling St. Clair before a committee to explain the debacle. He points fingers at shoddy supplies, desertions, and his men's lack of training. But the damage is done. Though cleared of direct blame, St. Clair resigns in disgrace, his reputation shattered. President Washington is livid, calling it a national calamity. The defeat emboldens the Western Confederacy, who see their victory as proof they can hold the frontier. British agents smirk from their forts, sensing an opportunity to meddle. Settlers in Ohio panic, and expansion grinds to a halt. But the Wabash clash isn't the end. It's a wake-up call. Washington and Congress realize the U.S. Army, a skeleton crew of underfunded regulars and unreliable militia, isn't up to the task. Enter Mad Anthony Wayne, a tough-as-nails general tasked with rebuilding from scratch. Over the next 2 years, Wayne creates the Legion of the United States, a disciplined professional force trained to fight on the frontier. In 1794, he defeats the Western Confederacy at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, forcing the tribes to sign the Treaty of Greenville in 1795, which opens Ohio to American settlement. The Wabash clash taught a bloody lesson. Raw numbers don't win wars. Training, preparation, and respect for your enemy do. It forced America to grow up fast, transforming its military from a ragtag militia into a force capable of securing a continent, and it showed the world that the native tribes, when united, were a power to be reckoned with, a legacy that deserves more than a footnote in history books. So, history buffs, what do you think? Could St. Clair have turned this disaster around with better planning, or was he doomed from the start? Could the Western Confederacy have held the frontier longer if the British had backed them more? Drop your hot takes in the comments below. I read every single one. If this deep dive into the Wabash clash blew your mind, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell for more epic history content. Tell me, what other forgotten battles or crushing defeats should we tackle next? The Alamo? Little Bighorn? You name it. Thanks for joining me in the trenches, and I'll see you in the next video.